Ladies and gentlemen, the beat goes on.
KHJ Los Angeles, the big 93.
Hello, this is the real...
That was 12 seconds that would change my life forever. I was just 7 years old and my sister was 2, and we never experienced anything like this before. We were living in the newly built Astoria Gardens apartment complex. After the initial shaking, we found ourselves out on a park bench between the complex looking towards the east. I was wrapped in a blanket, scared and cold, while my mom held my sister tightly in her blankie. There was weeping, crying, and sirens all around me that seemed to echo off the sides of the building. There were people who came out of the apartment surprised and in shock, many wearing close to nothing, wrapped in towels or in their underwear with blankets and children in tow. Then there were those who were injured, bloody, and wandering around aimlessly in shock. Then, with every tremor, people would scream or whine a little louder with concerns that the buildings around us would collapse at any time. The sun was seemingly taking forever to rise. Time went so slowly as a child, and with this real-life nightmare, it seemed so much slower. Then, watching straight ahead with this red sky and smoke from a fire in the distance, I wondered, where is it coming from? Will it come here? When will this nightmare end? Is Grandma and Grandpa okay? They also live in Sylmar, in a new home near the hospital. Surely they're okay. After sunrise, we got ourselves together. We had no phones or any other way to communicate, so we went to the car and headed to my grandparents'. Along the way, we scanned the radio for news and heard some popular and sometimes ironic music at the time, as we seen the damage to other homes along the way.
Oh, my darling, knock 3 times on the ceiling if you want me. One bad apple don't spoil a whole bunch, girl. Like a bridge over troubled water. When you're not. Mama told me not to. Making me dizzy. I feel the earth move under my feet. I feel the sky tumbling down.
Dick Spangler in Mobile 8-3 standing by. Dick?
Yes, I'm here at the edge of Van Norman Lake, the lower Van Norman.
We didn't know it at the time, but the top 30 feet of the concrete dam did break, with only the earthen embankment holding back the 1.8 billion gallons of water, and that it was just 6 feet from overtopping what was left of the dam. To make things worse, every time there's an aftershock, chunks of earth would be falling into the water. The county had given the evacuation orders to a large portion of the valley. As fear spread throughout the valley, 80,000 residents, all the way to Ventura Boulevard in the south end of the valley, were ordered to leave their homes. It was the biggest evacuation in the history of Los Angeles County. On January 9th, 1971 was the dedication of the Olive View Medical Center. An estimated 400 persons attended the event as Supervisor Warren Dorn termed the 6-story, 888-bed hospital as the county's largest and best equipped specialized general hospital. No one at the time ever thought that the hospital would only be operating for another 31 days. There were 554 patients at Olive View Hospital when the earthquake hit, 96 of whom were at the Community Mental Health Center, whose first floor totally collapsed. However, no one was killed in that part of the hospital. The main hospital building remained twisted but standing, except for the exterior stairwell towers which broke away from the main structure. 3 of these 6-story wings toppled over, one carrying a heroin addict to the ground. He remained dazed but unhurt inside the building after a 6-story tumble. He was still drug-free 5 months later, so they may have discovered a new, a bit expensive way to treat drug addiction. Despite the tremendous damage, only 3 persons died at the hospital during the earthquake. 2 patients with terminal chest disease died when the power failed and their respirators stopped. 1 ambulance driver was killed when he was struck by falling concrete while attempting to leave the building. Here we see a comparison between the old and new hospitals and where they stand today. Unfortunately, the same couldn't be said about the other nearby Veterans Administration Hospital. In a beautiful park-like setting sat the 426-bed Veterans Administration Hospital. And since many of the buildings were built in 1925, this meant trouble for the staff and patients here.
Yeah, let's check the Veterans Hospital out first.
We can see here from the aerial view that the damage to the hospital was immense. What used to be 3-story buildings are now rubble. Looking at the picture of the hospital, we can see the 2 large areas of collapse. The first area was the infirmary and main kitchen, built in 1925. This larger area of destruction was the semi-ambulant facility. This was also built in 1925. The older part of the hospital that collapsed was built of unreinforced hollow clay tiles which were not able to sustain the extreme ground shaking. So the patients and staff in those areas were crushed and many did not survive. Fortunately, a government construction crew was working in nearby Tujunga Canyon during the earthquake, so local authorities were able to call on them and their heavy equipment to help extricate people from the collapse. In all, 47 people died at the Veterans Hospital, representing most of the earthquake's casualties. There was a kitchen staff member that was found alive almost 24 hours after the quake. They were protected by a small space under a utility sink. Today, where the hospital was, lies a beautiful 97-acre memorial park as seen in this comparison photos. There was damage to 2 main areas of the freeway. To the south, it was the Golden State and Foothill Freeway interchange. But to the north, the Golden State and Antelope Valley freeway overpasses were not finished yet. So even though the damage was great, the casualties were few. The biggest casualty in this part of the interchange was this crane. However, the same couldn't be said in 1994 when Officer Clarence Wayne Dean, riding his motorcycle, plunged to his death from the collapsed freeway overpass at this very same location. Let's compare pictures from 1971 and 1994. In 1971, we can see an overpass. That's the southbound Interstate 5 to northbound Antelope Freeway. This other support will go to northbound Interstate 5 to northbound Antelope Freeway. And finally, the freeway under construction is the southbound Antelope Freeway to the southbound Interstate 5, where Officer Clarence Wayne Dean fell to his death on his way to work in 1994. Now we can see these three same supports and freeway systems in after the collapse in the 1994 earthquake. The next area of even more damage was where the newly built Foothill Freeway interchanged with Interstate 5. The collapse was not only stopped all traffic on Interstate 5, a major freeway, but also kept the railroad from connecting with the northern areas. This is also where 2 men died when the Foothill Freeway overpass collapsed on them, killing them instantly. So, where was the epicenter of the earthquake located? Looking at Google Earth, we'll find it here near the hilltop, 1.5 miles south of Bee Canyon, where the Antelope Valley Freeway and Soledad Canyon Road separate from each other. The 6.6 magnitude earthquake's epicenter was 5.25 miles below the surface of this location. So why was there so much damage in the Sylmar-San Fernando areas when they were 8 miles away? As you look over the area, you will see red lines going across the neighborhood. These are the locations of ground ruptures or surface faulting caused by the earthquake. But again, these are miles away from the epicenter. Why would such faulting be so prevalent so far away? We need to think dimensionally. In these pictures, we are looking at a single two-dimension view of the scene. However, remember, there's depth to the earth to consider. The epicenter was over 5 miles deep and 8 miles away, so if you drew a line from the epicenter to Sylmar, you'll have close to a 45-degree angle as shown. So as the fault broke deep underground over near Soledad Canyon, the effect of the fault broke surface in Sylmar and San Fernando as shown in the animation. This is why there was so much damage in the North Valley. As we look at this map of the ground fractures within Sylmar and San Fernando, we look at the corresponding damage to those nearby areas. First, let's look closer in the Olive View area, where there is a rupture that comes within a half mile of the hospital. Here are a couple examples of the damage that was done in that area. The next area we will look at is called the Veterans Fault, a relatively short fault that runs between Grabber and Tucker Avenues and from Pacoima Canyon to within 1,200 feet of the Veterans Hospital. This area had some newly built homes in 1971 and now is an area of many homes. Now we will go east into San Fernando, where a fracture runs along the mountains and into Sylmar, ending near the Boys Market at Hubbard and Glen Oaks. Let's look at the area along Foothill Boulevard, near the convalescent home, and is now near Freeway Interchange. The convalescent home was destroyed in the earthquake, and Foothill Boulevard was torn apart by the rupture. Notice here how a picture from 1971 lines up so well 50 years later. Look at the power poles. Are they still the same ones today? On the west end of the fault lays the Boys Market area at Hubbard and Glen Oaks. Here we see major damage to the grocery store and a crushed car. The owner of the car worked at the local donut shop and fortunately was safe in the shop when his car was crushed. Going to the eastern edge of the fault, we go into the San Gabriel Mountains. It's in the Cagle Canyon area that the rupture was prevalent. In some areas there was a 3-foot rise at the fault as shown. The same area is also known as Gravity Hill, where cars in neutral mysteriously roll uphill. In 1874, San Fernando was the first organized community in the valley. 2 years later, the railroad would come to town, allowing the area even more growth, with homes and businesses being built from whatever materials available at the time, with few concerns of earthquakes. By 1971, the valley had grown to a major population center, but with many structures built well before the building or earthquake codes. The San Fernando Mall was a prime example of pre-earthquake construction, and here we can see the outcome from the basic brick and mortar construction. Then there were the older homes. Delinda was a young mother along with her husband and 4 children who were living on Borden Avenue in a house made of rocks. Her husband and all 4 children survived, but Delinda unfortunately passed in bed when their house fell during the earthquake. The Sylmar 1971 earthquake was a 6.6. The San Francisco from 1989 was a 6.9, and the Northridge 1994 was a 6.7, all considered moderate earthquakes. However, the 1906 San Francisco earthquake was a 7.9, a major earthquake. So what does this mean? How strong are these earthquakes? Let's look at the magnitude scale. For each whole number, the amplitude of the ground motion recorded by a seismograph goes up 10 times. Using this scale, a magnitude 6 earthquake would result in 10 times the level of ground shaking as a magnitude 5 earthquake. To give you an idea how these numbers can add up, think of it in terms of energy released by explosives. A magnitude 1 earthquake releases as much energy as blowing up 6 ounces of dynamite, or this little firecracker here. But a magnitude 8 earthquake releases as much energy as detonating 6 million tons of TNT. To put that in perspective, if each of these sticks of dynamite represented 1 ton of explosives, and we showed you all the dynamite here, it would take 22,900 pages, and at this rate it will take over 90 minutes to see all the dynamite needed to represent an 8.0 earthquake. I hope this clarifies a relative comparison of just how the Richter scale works. But how does this affect the San Fernando Valley, or that matter, the West Coast? The 1971 and 1994 earthquakes were similar in size at 6.6 and 6.7, as well as deaths at 65 and 60. Also, the damage was similar as seen here. But what if we had a 7.6 or even an 8? That would spell disaster to the entire valley. We know from history that it will happen again, and maybe in your backyard. So ask yourself, when the big one does occur, will I be prepared?